Human nostalgia, according to Albert Camus, is the desire of all peoples to find a coherent meaning within the world. The absurd is the inability to reconcile this desire with the reality that the world does, in fact, lack meaning. When faced with this realization, a man has two options. He can either retreat back into nostalgia, into comfort, where his deluded beliefs about religion, science, or spirituality shield him from the harsh truths of his existence. Or he can accept it, embrace the absurdity of his life, and cease his endless struggle to try and find what is beyond his feeble comprehension. To try and seek an ultimate truth to the meaning of the universe can only lead to madness. So, in the process of writing this script, I came to a realization. I fucked up. I fear that I may have lured you into the false and dangerous belief that philosophy is fun. And I'm here to set the record straight right now. Philosophy is not fun. Philosophy is a nightmare from which you will never wake, that will leave you questioning the reality you exist within and whether you even possess the right to exist within it. Maybe I should just end it all, drowning to death in a giant pot of my own chili.
You put the peeps in the chili pot, keep them both up.
So this is my apology video. This is where I'm going to make it crystal clear to you all that philosophy is terrible and you should never, ever, ever pursue it in any capacity. Also apart from the fact that its only viable career path is becoming a YouTuber. So, let me ask you a question. What is goodness? And I don't mean what does it mean to be good, I think we've thoroughly explored that by this point. I mean, what is goodness as an idea, a concept? In D&D, how can you pick an apple from the seven heavens of Bytopia and have it be more good than an apple that was plucked from the material plane? What about good creatures like angels? Are they condemned to be good? And if that is the case, do they even have free will? And how do both objects and creatures possess goodness? What is goodness? And in order to do that, we need to move away from the tangible, rational, cause and effect logic of moral philosophy we've been talking about previously, and into the realm of pure thought and abstraction. Today, we are going to be entering the meta. If you haven't seen my other videos in this series, I highly recommend you go back and watch those first, because they're going to provide some much needed context. Meta is a Greek prefix meaning beyond, and it is used to signify that what we are talking about is beyond the scope of the thing itself. For example, when I say that someone is metagaming, what I'm saying is that they are thinking beyond the scope of the game itself. D&D is the world of the game, it is the characters, the story, and it is only by thinking about D&D at a meta level or beyond that, that the mechanics of the game become clear. Your fighter doesn't know that the enemy goblin has an AC of 14 and thus it is statistically in their favour to use their great weapon fighting feat. That is all knowledge beyond what the character in the world would have in the game, thus it is metagaming. So when I say meta-ethics, I'm talking about beyond ethics, or rather the fundamental questions of ethics, the ideas and questions that underpin every other discussion of ethics that we have talked about previously. And when I say metaphysics, I'm saying that you need to run. Seriously, just run and close this video because nothing is ever going to make sense to you again. Metaethics is one of the three principal branches of moral philosophy. Previously, we have only talked about normative ethics because that asks the question of what we ought to do or how to be a good person. The chief purpose of metaethics is to determine the fundamental nature of morality. And to do that, we need to understand the nature of moral facts. A moral fact is best described as an immutable truth about the ethical nature of the world. Just like how the law of gravity is an immutable scientific fact about the physical nature of the world. And by that I mean you can't disagree with gravity, or rather if you do disagree with gravity, that doesn't stop it from existing. Gravity is a fact about the reality we live in. In the same way, if the moral fact killing is wrong is true, then it means that killing is wrong in any and all circumstances. That is a law of the universe. The key question of metaethics is determining the nature of these moral facts. Some people believe that moral facts exist and that they are objective to us, they are independent of any of our opinions or experiences, and therefore morality is objective. Some things are right and others are wrong. Other people believe that moral facts do exist, but that they are relative to individuals, cultures, and societies, and that they can change over time. While other people still argue that moral facts as a concept are just nonsense, and that morality, as we currently conceive it, just doesn't exist. And these three ideas are representative of the three main branches of metaethics: moral realism, moral relativism, and moral anti-realism. Moral realism is the first of the theories. They believe that moral facts are real and objective to us. They are laws of the universe, just like gravity is. Everyone in the universe could believe the opposite of a particular moral truth or moral fact, and everyone could be wrong. Behaving morally then is just a matter of determining what the moral truths of the universe are and obeying them. Deontology is the most obvious example of this, but you may not realize that both utilitarianism and, to a degree, virtue ethics are also moral realist philosophies. For example, utilitarianism is based upon the belief that its foundational premise, or this moral truth, that you should always try and maximize happiness and minimize the amount of harm in the universe, is true. That's a moral truth. They believe it is true, which makes it a moral relativist theory. That is the objective law of the universe. This is the way that morality works. Moral relativists agree that moral facts exist, but rather than not some immutable law of the universe, instead they are just constructs that we as a society have come up with, and thus moral facts are relative to societies and cultures. And thus you can have multiple and contradictory moral truths existing within the world. If all the humans in the universe just ceased to exist, then morality would cease to exist. This is a very popular theory today because of our increasingly globalized society. Who are we to say that the way that other cultures practice their traditions and morals and ethics are wrong? That's very conceited, very selfish, or at least that's how the argument goes. But then let's look at an example I've often gone back to in this series. We've got two cities, one of them hates elves, and the other one doesn't. In the city that hates elves, elves are criminals and can be killed on sight. Whether the other city, they are just treated like normal citizens. Moral relativism is actually okay with the society that hates elves killing the elves, because that society functions from a different set of moral laws or moral facts as the other society that does like elves. While moral realism wouldn't let this fly because you've got this objective definition that doesn't care what society or culture is following it. You've only got a single set of moral laws, and you can't get contradictions like this. Moral anti-realists deny the existence of moral facts altogether. They say that when you make a claim like killing is wrong or stealing is wrong, you are not actually making a comment on some immutable state of the universe at large. You are just expressing an opinion that to you, killing is wrong and you disapprove of that action. But that doesn't really have any sort of bearing on what other people do. They've got their own view of morality which could permit stealing or killing or whatever. Which means morality as we currently conceive of it breaks down. Morality just doesn't exist at anything greater than the individual level. And these three perspectives are hotly debated in our world, and thankfully I am not here to go into all that. I'm not here to explore the fucked up state of our late capitalistic world. No, instead, it seems like in D&D, this entire argument is solved for us. It seems to me at first, and I think most people intuitively, that D&D's form of morality obeys a moral realist perspective of the multiverse. We have objective definitions of good and evil that form the basis of our moral facts. Morality and good and evil exist physically within the world. There is no way it can be relative. And because they exist and we have these definitions, there's no way they don't exist either, so we can just toss moral anti-realism out the window. But there are two key problems that come up when we try and apply moral realism to the multiverse of Dungeons & Dragons. The first is, how do we actually know that these definitions are correct? And you could just hand wave this and say, well, that's what the books say, that's what the multiverse says, this is the way that it works given all the evidence that we have. But that wouldn't be in the spirit of metaethics now, would it? This is known as the grounding problem. There needs to be some floor, some ground, some foundation from which we can prove that these definitions of good and evil are the correct ones. And this is of particular interest to deontological philosophers, because they need to be able to prove why their set of laws, or in our case moral truths, are the correct ones. And they've come up with a number of possible solutions. One of the most famous comes from Immanuel Kant, who we talked about with relation to deontology in the first morality video. He believed that his moral laws can be proved by reason alone, which was a bold claim to make. And honestly, he did admirably well. But for our purposes here, his categorical imperative doesn't really apply to our definitions, so he's of limited usefulness. Another way of solving the grounding problem is through divine command theory, which basically just says that, well, our moral truths, our moral laws are good because God is all good and God created them. So therefore, you know, morality solved, guys. But of course, this doesn't quite work the same way in D&D as it does in our real worlds. There's no monotheistic tradition in Dungeons & Dragons, and especially the multiverse, like the Christian beliefs that this theory was based on. D&D takes a distinctly polytheistic view of its gods, who all have different beliefs and morals that contradict and conflict with each other. And that's setting aside the fact that they didn't actually create the multiverse, they just inhabit it like every other creature. For that, we would need some kind of creator deity, some kind of over-deity or uber-deity, a being of such cosmic power that they could create the multiverse and its laws and everything within it. And beings of a somewhat similar power scale are recorded to exist within the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, the over-deity Ao from the Forgotten Realms being the most notable one. Ao created the entire realm space, the crystal sphere of the Forgotten Realms. He created the gods Saloon and Shar, and they created other gods, and I actually did a video on this a long time ago when this channel was first starting up and I tried my hand at animations. And you know, it exists, it's something. Let's forget about that. So while Ao did create the realm space, create the Forgotten Realms, he didn't create the multiverse. He created one world within the multiverse. He isn't the uber-deity. The limit of our knowledge of power in the multiverse ends at the over-deities. There is no mention of any being that could potentially be higher. The knowledge of gods and mortals alike, the multiverse just is, and always has been. Basically, what I'm saying is that the multiverse doesn't solve the grounding problem. There is no reason for why this definition of good is actually good. It just is.
Just the way it works.
And we could continue to debate that and undermine the entire last hour and a half of videos of philosophy and D&D that I've done. But you know what? I'm gonna say we Occam's razor this bitch. I'm just gonna say, like, look, this is how it works in the multiverse, right? Like, guess what, Metaethics? I'm the DM. This is my world, and if I say this is the definition, then this is the fucking definition. Now, unfortunately, the grounding problem isn't actually the only issue, or the biggest issue, that moral realism faces in D&D. The perceptive viewers among you may have already noticed, and gold star if you did, that this definition of good doesn't actually work for our moral truths. Moral truths are binary statements. They're yes and no, right or wrong, true or false. And if we were to extrapolate this definition of good out into a list of moral facts, we see the issues that come up. These moral facts don't work for all of our good moral theories. Let's take the basic moral fact that killing is wrong. Pretty uncontroversial. But if that moral fact is true, then that means that utilitarianism and arguably virtue ethics, both of which have room to permit murder and killing, are false. That means they're wrong theories and they cannot be good. But if that statement is false, then most forms of deontology and even our principal definition of good is thrown out the window. Likewise, I already mentioned how utilitarianism is based off the foundational principle, and that foundational principle contradicts with deontology and virtue ethics. What I'm getting at is that these moral theories, as well as the alignments they are tied to, are incompatible. They all start from a different set of moral truths about the multiverse. They create irreconcilable contradictions. So if the multiverse is, as it seems, a morally realist multiverse, that means that we can't have all of deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics as good moral theories. No list of moral facts could conceivably encompass all three moral theories. which means that we are left with only two options. The first is to relegate utilitarianism and virtue ethics to neutral theories to allow for deontology to encompass a distinct set of moral facts. And the second option is to just disregard morality in D&D and accept that it is something beyond our comprehension.
Sorry, my brain is melting. How?
Okay, no, there must be a way to solve this. Even if it's not realism, maybe it's relativism. Relativism would allow for each of the three moral theories to have their own distinct moral facts that they can act upon, right? That would solve it. No, because then that would just mean that the Abyss and the Nine Hells are actually good because, you know, there's no objective system by which to say no to them. It must be realism. There needs to be some kind of objective scale by which right and wrong are judged, or else the entire multiverse and its system of morality falls apart. But it can't be realism because of what we just established. They all three contradict each other, and they can't just think. Okay, I'm calm. Let's move on. Maybe if we take a look at how morality actually works within the multiverse at a metaphysical level, that will give us some grander understanding of how it works at a metaethical level, huh? Because, you know, there must be some solution, right? It must make sense, right? Morality is an idea in Dungeons & Dragons. It is how we judge right from wrong, good from evil. But if morality is an idea, then how can it also be a physical thing? Your DM will often describe things in terms of good and evil. For example, you approach a cursed object and feel a sense of foreboding and dread around it. Or you approach a blessed chalice that fills you with a sense of calmness and serenity. Mount Celestia is an entire universe of nothing but lawful good. The Abyss is nothing but an entire universe of chaotic evil. But how can these planes embody in both their inhabitants and their structure and constitution these ideas of good and evil? To understand this, we need to understand the nature of physical properties. And this is where shit gets really weird. This is an apple. It is green, round, juicy, and well, an apple. But what I'm actually doing when I'm describing this apple is describing its properties. I'm saying that it has the property of greenness and roundness. Those are physical properties. But I also said it was juicy, which means it possesses the property of juiciness, as well as the property of appleness. And those aren't physical things like round and green are, those are ideas. So really, properties aren't just like physical descriptions, they're ideas that a thing can possess. That's why I can say this apple has the property of appleness, but these books have the property of bookness, and therefore they're not the same. Now, there are two ways of thinking about these properties. The first is as universals, which means that these properties exist separate to this object. Greenness is this abstract thing that then instantiates itself into independent objects. So that's why you can have a green apple as well as a green car. Greenness is an idea separate to any physical representation of what green is. If it wasn't, you could point to something and say, that is green, as in like that is greenness, that object is greenness. But it's not. You can't point to greenness no more than you can point to morality. They're just ideas, concepts, and those concepts manifest as abstract objects. Abstract objects, according to a universalist, are real things that are non-spatio-temporal, so they're objects that don't exist in space or time. But nonetheless, they do exist, don't get me wrong. These things exist. We just can't perceive them, or touch them, or interact with them in any meaningful way. So a thing is green, or round, or an apple, or a book, when it instantiates the abstract object of greenness, roundness, bookness, etc.
I don't know what to tell you. That's the easiest way to describe it.
On the other hand, a nominalist or particularist would state that no, that's stupid. When we are looking at this apple and we describe its properties, we are not describing them in terms of some imaginary abstract objects. We are simply assigning those properties to this thing. Like, this thing is an apple because it looks like an apple. Like a sandwich and a toasted sandwich are both sandwiches because they possess the property of sandwichness, but the property of sandwichness is just something we have assigned to it. By this view, properties aren't just some stupid abstract object that is wholly theoretical. Rather, they're just categories. They're descriptions that we give to things by how we perceive them. So we perceive this apple as being green, so we say it's green. It's got the property of greenness, and that's all there is to it. Properties are just constructs of our minds. There's nothing metaphysical about them and reflects the way that we see the world. The problem with the nominalist theory is that if properties are just something we assign to objects and they reflect how we perceive them, then that means that properties don't exist without us observing them or assigning them. It means that if all humans were to die in the universe at once, then mountains would cease to be mountains. Green would cease to be green. If everything is relative to us and how we perceive it, then nothing is innate to the object itself. And the only explanation for that, in philosophical terms, is abstract objects. But abstract objects are fucking weird. This philosophical theory just claims that there are these non-spatio-temporal, non-interactive objects out there that real things instantiate. It's not falsifiable. Like, you can't prove that, but you also can't disprove that. That's stupid. But the thing is, in our D&D world, who gives a fuck? Seriously, in D&D we've got angels and entire planes of existence and, you know, all sorts of weird, wacky, magical shit. Is it really that far-fetched to have abstract objects thrown into the mix as well? I don't think so. And it also gives us a very nice framework by which I can describe goodness. An object that instantiates goodness is simply instantiating the abstract object of goodness.
So, you get it.
This broke me.
Okay, so we've dealt with some pretty heavy stuff just then, but we're not done yet. If objects can instantiate goodness and evilness, then what about creatures? Could they feasibly as well? And if a creature can instantiate goodness, what does that mean for free will? Planars or immortals in D&D are what we call the inhabitants of specific planes of existence. These creatures are born from the plane itself and are infused with its essence just like the plane itself is. They are instantiated with goodness or evilness or lawfulness or chaos. I should also clarify that they can also be instantiated into things. Having true free will from a philosophical sense means being able to make any choice in any given situation. But an angel, by their nature, cannot make a chaotic choice or be evil, which means some choices of actions are limited to them, and thus they do not have free will. I'd argue that humans can also instantiate goodness or evilness, but when they are created neutral, which means they aren't really tied to the alignments in the same way the planars are. Planars are always of one alignment. Angels are always lawful good, demons chaotic evil. It's part of their very nature. So, does that mean they've got free will? To explore this, we need to explore the phrase coined by the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, existence precedes essence. To Sartre, a thing's essence is its purpose or ideal form. Using the common example, a hammer is an object that was designed by another being to be a hammer, whose principal function is to hit things. This is the hammer's essence, and in this case, it precedes or comes before its existence. If we didn't want it to hit things, we wouldn't have made it a hammer and it wouldn't exist. Once created, the hammer cannot choose to not be a hammer. But when it comes to humans, Sartre believes that our existence preceded our essence. That is to say that we were not created with a specific purpose. We don't have a simple meaning like a hammer does in our lives. Therefore, we are radically free in order to choose the meaning of our lives. So the question is, when it comes to planars then, is does being instantiated with these alignments mean that their essence precedes their existence, in which case they don't have free will, or does their existence still precede their essence, in which case they do? Modrons are a race of purely lawful beings from the plane of mechanists. They zealously obey their bureaucratic laws and obey a strict, unbreakable caste hierarchy. Only it's not unbreakable. Sometimes, very rarely, a spark of chaos awakens within a Modron due to extraordinary circumstances, and in this case, that Modron goes rogue. They don't become a rogue, no, but they are able to suddenly break the rules and law that is innate to their being. In these cases, the rogue Modron fears for their life, because the other Modrons will seek it out and destroy it as an abhorrent corruption of its kind. Despite this though, if the Modron's essence really preceded its existence, then this wouldn't be possible. Sure, you could argue, and the Modrons would, that this rogue Modron is no longer a Modron, because the very nature and essence of Modrons is to be lawful. So by not being lawful, you are no longer a Modron, but that's not really the case. A broken hammer is still a hammer, it's just a shitty one. A toy hammer is still a hammer, it just can't fulfill its purpose. That doesn't make it not a hammer. This means that a rogue Modron is still a Modron, just one that can't fulfill the one purpose it was built for. The reality of this means that while for most Modrons, their essence or their lawful nature has a near iron grip on their existence, it is feasibly possible for a Modron's existence to precede its essence under extraordinary circumstances. The question is whether or not these extraordinary circumstances fundamentally change the nature of the race as a whole, or if they can only be applied to individual creatures. Is the rogue Modron an exception to the rule, or are they evidence that there is no rule? Spoilers for Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus here, because I'm going to be talking about some examples that are coming from that campaign. If you haven't played it, you really should. It is fantastic. The Archduchess of Avernus, Zariel, used to be an angel. She was corrupted by Asmodeus and brought down into the hells to fight demons for all eternity. But even when she was an angel, she still displayed tendencies of insubordination and questioning of authority. There's a famous scene where during the trial of Asmodeus, where he was being trialed by Primus, the god of all law, Zariel pushed her way to the front of the crowd, demanding to be heard, demanding to condemn Asmodeus for his actions. But in the end, even though she was corrupted by Asmodeus, it was her choice to sign that pact. He didn't force her hand or anything. She had these tendencies before she fell. The fact that she did this and that this transformation can be reversed, which is the main plot of Descent into Avernus, whether or not Zariel can be redeemed, shows that even for an angel who, to our knowledge, hasn't had some like cataclysmic event or life-changing event happen to her that would change the nature of her being, shows that Zariel does have free will. You could make the argument that Zariel went slightly mad by witnessing the horrors of the Blood War herself. There's no evidence in the text to support that necessarily, but I think knowing what I do about PTSD in our world, it's a fairly logical conclusion as to why she could be able to break her lawful alignment when other angels don't. There's no doubt that witnessing the most horrific war in the entire multiverse is going to do some pretty damaging things to your psychology. There is also this bearded devil called Crickendolt in Descent into Avernus. My party has fondly started calling him Cricketon. But he is a bearded devil who is chaotic good in his alignment. That shouldn't be able to happen. Sure, it's because he got ran over by an infernal war machine, he's got a huge concave skull and his brain's damaged, and it is because of this fact that planars are only recorded to be able to break their alignment after having experienced extraordinary circumstances and trauma that I have to conclude that for the most part, for 99.99999% of planars, they don't have philosophical true free will. I'm not going to go into the whole free will versus determinism argument, it's not particularly relevant here, and that is a whole other can of worms. It seems to be that the only leeway a planar will have in terms of acting in accordance with their alignment is the leeway that is provided by our vague definitions of good, evil, law, and chaos. Which brings us back to our first problem, that we don't have any codified moral facts that don't contradict each other.
Hey, Drew? Drew? Oh. Hey, Drew, what are you doing?
Taleb, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. I thought of everything, okay? You need to help me.
Is this the morale video?
Yes, morality video. It doesn't make sense. Okay, it can't be relativism, because it can be realism. You need to help me, it doesn't. Okay, so we have established that goodness is an abstract object in D&D, and that goodness can be instantiated into both objects and creatures, and that planars can have free will. I think we pretty thoroughly understand the nature of goodness in the multiverse now, right? But that doesn't help us with the problem of meta-ethics. To clarify, right, like, it can't be realists because the moral truths that are necessary for moral realism all contradict with our good alignments. But it can't be relativism because if for them that to be the case, then all of the evil alignments would also be good and morality would just break apart. There needs to be that binary dynamic. They're the only two options. There's... Unless... No. Unless it's neither relativism nor realism. The third option, anti-realism, unless morality doesn't exist. Okay, no, hear me out. I know this is probably the most whack thing that I've said this entire video, and it undermines the other 1.5 hours of basically D&D philosophy lectures I've done. But let's look at the options here, people. It's not like we've got a lot of them. I have to rule out relativism and realism. Anti-realism is the only one left. But that doesn't make sense because good and evil exist and morality exists, but what if good and evil don't represent morality? What if we've been wrong about this since the very beginning? What if the books have been wrong, everyone's been wrong, and the alignment system isn't trying to tell us what the right and wrong thing to do is? Instead, good and evil as abstract objects, those ideas are just ideas, they're not morality. Remember how in my video on neutral moral theories, I said that right and wrong can be divorced from good and evil when we're talking about the neutral theories? What if it's not just the neutral theories that do that? What if the good and evil theories do the same? What if morality just isn't a thing in D&D? I know I sound like a mad person right now, and I probably look like a mad person, but I have done so many hours of thinking about this, and this is the only logical solution. Good and evil and law and chaos are just ideas, concepts, and opinions. They are just different ways that people in the multiverse, and even the multiverse itself, thinks about these things. The multiverse says that this definition of good is, it's good, but that doesn't make it right. And this definition of evil doesn't make it wrong. Both these ideas are balanced, they both have worth, and being one over the other isn't right or wrong. And this actually has backing in the D&D text itself. Like, let's look at the trial of Asmodeus. Primus was trying to convict Asmodeus for being evil, like evil was a bad thing, but he couldn't. Asmodeus proved his innocence, and that's always been a big boon for Asmodeus. Like, he was silver-tongued enough to defend himself in the court, but Primus is a being of pure law. He wouldn't be swayed by arguments. No, the only logical conclusion is that Asmodeus wasn't in the wrong. What Asmodeus is actually doing is not right or wrong, it's just he's doing his thing. And look at beings like Mordenkainen who believe in the balance of the multiverse. If good was to become too powerful over evil, then the entire universe would just collapse. There needs to be balance. To that end, Mordenkainen would help empower a demon lord against an angel incursion, because he knows that if that demon lord loses, the angels and the forces of good would strike a decisive and powerful blow against the forces of evil, to the point where they might actually win the divine wars. And he's not wrong in doing that as a result. Sure, you could try and claim this as utilitarianism, but it's not. It's just, in order to really function at this level, you need to separate yourself from concepts of morality. You need to divorce good and evil from morality. Am I even making any fucking sense here? Because, like, I feel like a madman. This goes against everything that I understand about D&D's alignment system, and the alignment system in general, but that makes it make so much more sense. The alignment system isn't telling you that your character is morally good or morally evil, it's just saying you are instantiating goodness or evilness, or lawfulness or chaos. It's categorizing you, but it is not claiming that you are moral or immoral. And that makes sense from a meta level as well, because, you're adventurers, you're gonna murder things and kill things. Like, you would have to feel bad for doing the very thing that D&D was built for in order to have this binary dichotomy of good and evil. We need to untether our concept of morality from alignment, despite what the books say. I know they say that good and evil represents morality, but that wrong. The alignment chart has always been ridiculed for being simplistic and stupid and not an accurate representation of the moral grayness of morality, but that's because it was never meant to. We have just warped what it was actually meant to be. So morality is nonsense, you see. It's nonsense. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. But what does that mean for these videos then? That I just spend countless hours of my life and 2 hours of your time, over 2 hours of your time, talking about something that doesn't matter. Yes, this is philosophy.
That broke me. I'm done.
So this brings to a close this series on morality in D&D. Do you guys agree with me on this or disagree with me on this? If you have any thoughts on this video and anything I've touched on, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, but also I'm actually going to be active on our Dungeon Inn Discord server, because we've actually got one of those. That way I get to really talk with you guys and engage with your ideas and hopefully clarify any of the stuff that made no sense in this video. But also tell me what you guys want to see from me next. This philosophy series has been a immensely satisfying creative endeavor that has, well, yes, legitimately melted my brain. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And clearly you guys have as well. The tiny subset that I thought these videos were going to appeal to was clearly a lot larger than I thought it was. So my heart and thanks goes out to all of you. As always, thank you very much to my patrons, Brick Bradford, Ashley Howard, and Susie Fernandez, for supporting me through all of this and continuing to do so via my Patreon. So you can head over to my Patreon, and there you get early access to my publishing content as well as scripts, ideas, and it's just another way for me to communicate with you guys and show me that you appreciate and are enjoying this content and want to support me to make more. And yeah, that is really about it. I think I'm done. Thank you for watching. I'm the Innkeeper, and I hope you enjoyed your stay here at the Dungeon Inn.